Well, we're finally here. After a great season, this comes to the conclusion of my 10th anniversary season here with Orchestra Iowa, and it's been a remarkable season. You know, people often ask me about programming, and I indulged myself this year with some incredible rarities. The problem with programming often is that people like what they know, and sure, the mainstream repertoire is filled with great music. But sometimes audiences miss out on those rarities that are really important and great. And that's why we did the Firebird as a complete ballet, which you never get a chance to hear this year. It's why we did the Missa Solemnis, arguably Beethoven's greatest work, again, that you rarely hear in concert. And now finally, the Pièce de Résistance, a work that's been on my bucket list for years and the musicians as well, Richard Strauss's Ein Heldenleben. And the way we put this together is that each of the pieces on this program follow the similar route in that they're all about various heroes. We begin with music of Sibelius, the return of Lemminkainen, who is a renowned history of mythology in Finnish culture. We have Siegfried's Funeral March, one of the great Wagnerian heroes. But really, what makes this program interesting are the last two works. A work by Dvorak called Hero Song, and of course, then Richard Strauss's Ein Heldenleben. The work by Dvorak, A Hero Song, is literally the last orchestral piece that he wrote. And it was written 1 year before Strauss wrote his great tone poem as well. And yet the two follow the same path forward. They're both autobiographical. The composer is the hero. And they go through a narrative of their entire life, essentially. And I find it really interesting to compare the two composers' approach to what essentially is the same topic material. When you ask a musician what music they most covet, it's usually the music of Richard Strauss, Mahler, or Stravinsky. And that's because these three composers really knew how to write for a high level for every instrument in the entire orchestra. When you play this kind of music, everybody gets a taste. No one is superfluous. If you were to compare or describe the symphony as a high-performance car, many times musicians spend a lot of their careers driving around the block at about 10 miles an hour. But when you get to the music of Mahler or Strauss, in this case, Ein Heldenleben, you are now a Ferrari working at high speed. And that's why everyone is so excited about this work. It's rarely performed for a variety of reasons, usually the size, the virtuosic capabilities of the orchestra, and the sheer expense. And that's why I chose it to cap off my 10th anniversary with the Orchestra Iowa. This really is a special occasion, and this is something that has been on the minds of the musicians and me for at least 10 years since I've arrived. In the late 1800s, there was a big debate going on of how music should be composed. Should music be absolute, meaning that it should carry the title of symphony or sonata, where music just stands alone and just is and should be appreciated just as for what it was composed? The other part of the debate was, should music be programmatic? Should it actually have extra musical meaning? And Richard Strauss wrote tone poems that actually followed a plot. In his final tone poem, Ein Heldenleben, the plot is rather straightforward. The first section is literally a description of the hero, a very swashbuckling theme that introduces our hero and main character of the piece. The second part of the program, or the part of the piece, describes his antagonists, his enemies, if you will, and you will hear that in sort of this chromatic, dissonant, sort of needling kind of music. And then the third section of the piece is when he meets his love interest. And the love interest is personified by the violin, played by concertmaster Don Gingrich. And this is what's really funny. I wish people could read the score like I can, because when Richard Strauss is writing for the violin, he's giving musical instructions to the performer. And I'll read off some of them for you, and you'll get an idea of the personality behind his love interest. Hypocritically laughing, frivolously, full of longing, playfully, suddenly calm again, very affectionate, angrily, fast, and naggingly. In short, Richard Strauss is in love with a psycho kitten who is totally cray-cray. The middle portion, or the third movement of this symphonic tone poem, is a battle scene between his antagonists, his enemies, and our hero. And what you hear is this tumultuous, chaotic rendering of all the themes that you've heard prior to this moment. And of course, it ends with this apotheosis where our hero wins victoriously, which leads us into the fourth section of the piece, and it's basically the hero's works of peace, I think is how he entitled it. And something interesting happens here. During this section, Richard Strauss starts to summarize the music that he had written before in his earlier tone poems. You'll hear a quotation from Don Juan, music from Don Quixote, a little bit of music from Death and Transfiguration, and others. And in fact, the piece ends with a very subtle quotation of Also sprach Zarathustra. So in this section of the piece, he's actually summarizing his own career in an incredibly masterful way. And then the piece ends so sublimely beautifully, and it represents the retirement of our hero and his eventual ascension into Elysium. All of this is under a 40-minute symphonic work of extreme virtuosity and excitement, and I know that it's something that the musicians have been coveting for years. Certainly I have as well. And this is the perfect ending and the capping to a great season and a great decade.